intention is irrelevant. That doesn't really help us with anything. I've changed the slide and moved a little bit of things around to better suit what I'm doing today. So the next thing we're going to look at is, in particular, the trolley problem. Remember, these are general problems with utilitarianism that have been identified. You know, that every ethicist or every person teaching ethics is going to talk about. So, ye old trolley problem is used to identify potentially some problems with utilitarianism. Okay. So, here we go. All right, the trolley problem, as we currently know it, was implemented by Philippa Foot, I believe, during the 1950s, maybe 1960s, used to actually illustrate a specific idea that we talk about sometimes in medical ethics called the principle of double effect. And but it has been used also to illustrate some particular issues with utilitarianism. The actual trolley problem, I believe, is much older. I think the first version of this was in 1835, and the philosopher at that time was asking the question, if you could shift your, trolley, should you save 5 people or should you save your son on the opposite track, to sort of use that to pick out our intuitions, our feelings about how we regard family relative to others with unethical problems. Okay, so Philippa Foot gives us this particular problem. There's a trolley coming down the track, and there is a split in the track. If the trolley keeps going in the direction that it currently is, it will strike 5 people who are, they're on the track. You can't necessarily see what they're doing. If you're also happen to be standing next to a switch, and if you push the switch, the train will change direction and go to a side track where there is one person standing on the side track. So the classic question is, do you move the lever? If you don't move the lever, it's going to go straight ahead and presumably kill the 5 people that are on the track. If you push the lever, it's going to move the trolley to kill one person that's on the first track. Clearly, this is something that's useful, or at least interesting to a certain regard in class discussions. The photo down at the bottom is from the song Trolley in Meet Me in St. Louis. That's what it was. Rather silly musical. So, in the way that the problem is currently stated, most people would shift the lever. That, as stated, giving no other information, right, that probably 5 lives is more valuable than 1 life. The utilitarian would flip the switch. Probably look at it, count on their fingers maybe, and flip the switch and go get a beer. However, her friend Judith Jarvis Thompson gives us a modification on this particular idea. And it's very similar in a lot of ways, but people will often change their mind with this particular modification. So now, instead of one track that splits into 2, we just have one track. And there is a bridge that goes over the track. You are standing on the bridge. There are 5 people on the other, down at the end of the track where the train is headed. If the train keeps going or a trolley keeps going in its particular direction, it's going to kill all 5 people. However, you're standing next to a really large person, and they're so large that you believe if you push this person off the bridge and onto the track, that this one person's body will stop the trolley and save the 5 people at the other end. So, similar trade off. One person for 5. In this case, however, instead of simply standing aside and pulling a lever, you actually have to push somebody onto a track. And if you're, it's instantly more oogie. There's just something much more direct and personal about contemplating, touching someone else and pushing someone else. So let's imagine that the large person standing next to you is actually standing on a trapdoor, and you have a lever. You can open the trapdoor. You don't have to touch them at all. So they could potentially, fall onto the track and stop the train. Many of us are inclined to shift the lever in the first case and are not willing to do it in the second case. And it's a question of why, what is it about the second situation that really makes it different? It is thought that one of the reasons is that in the first case, the one person who dies on the second track is unfortunate. Sucks to be you. No, it's not something that anybody intends to happen, and it has nothing to do ultimately with whether or not we can save 5 people. We're not actually directly balancing their life against 5 others. The loss of their life, the saving of the 5 lives is not contingent upon the loss of the one. However, in the Fat Man modification, saving 5 people does mean you need to kill one person. So it's thought that this makes people kind of uncomfortable, and we want to differentiate between the 2 cases morally. We want to say that one is kind of not very good, and we want to say the second one is really not very good. But the utilitarian doesn't really give us any means to differentiate between the 2 cases, that to a utilitarian they are morally equivalent. That is the trolley problem as used for, describing utilitarianism and one of its fundamental problems. And it's not just a matter of intention, it's just a matter of how this sort of thing goes. Actually, the folks that did Cynicism and Happiness, I believe it's called, that particular comic have created a game called Trial by Trolley. I have it on order at the moment. If it's really cool, maybe we'll play it later if we, all manage to get back together or something. So this is the trolley problem. Probably everybody is familiar with it in one capacity or another. And you can manipulate this idea actually a great deal. You can use all different kinds of comparisons. You can say that it's the 5 people on the track are old and the one person on the other is young, and you could say that maybe there are 5 death row inmates tied down to the track versus one Nobel Prize winner on the one track, and so on and so forth, and use it to fish out intuitions about our feelings about differences in terms of moral value for do the aged have less of a value morally speaking, or their lives less important than the lives of a younger person, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's kind of the trolley problem. Let's see. I think my favorite one was where there's a film on YouTube. A guy presented this problem to his son. He had a little kid, maybe 3 or 4, laid out a track that splits and puts one person on the one track and puts 5 people on the other track and gets in the little train, and the kid takes a look at it, and he takes the one person off of the track and puts him on the track with all 5 people. So now all 6 people are on the track, and then runs the little train right over him. So anyway, this can get a little silly, but this is an idea that's commonly used to try and illustrate some things about different utilitarian issues, and it's also used to illustrate some other philosophical, ethical problems. Okay, so, oh right, I need to do the organ donor. I don't have a slide for that. There is a similar problem to the trolley problem. It's called the organ donor problem, and this may help tease out the intuition that we might have about the difference between the cases. In the first case, right, there's one person standing on the one track and there's 5 people on the other. So in this case, what we are to imagine is that we are tremendously great transplant surgeons, and we are, in our office. There are 5 patients waiting for us in the little waiting rooms, in the little gowns that don't quite close, in the back. They are all very much at risk of dying before they get a chance to move up the list far enough to obtain new organs. And just before you're about to go in and start meeting with people and talking to them about how they're doing and checking them out physically, a very healthy looking young person walks into your clinic, walks into your office, and says, yeah, I'm doing really well. I just need, my annual physical. I promised my grandma I would always do that no matter what. So, yeah. I mean, she's dead now and stuff, but, promise is a promise. Okay, so the organ donor, by, some great miracle of fate, this person has exactly the right blood type and, other kinds of immunological markers that indicate that their organs would be used, would fit really well with your 5 patients, size wise and immune system wise. So if you kill the one healthy person in your office and you take their organs, you can save the lives of 5 other people. So again, like the trolley person problem, if we kill one person, we can save 5 other lives, right? There's the initial one, right, where you're switching the track, and then, this is perhaps closer to the Fat Man variation, where we literally are killing one person to save the lives of 5 others. I hope we find that to be morally abhorrent. That's not the kind of thing that we ought to do as, terrific transplant surgeons. So it helps to sort of pick out the distinction between the Fat Man and the trolley problem, which is that using the person's death as a means to the ends of obtaining, of saving 5 lives is different from sort of losing one life in the process of trying to save 5 others. Okay. It's thought that, again, real utilitarianism, like in the promise example, may be able to resolve, how a utilitarian ought to respond to this. Supposedly, the act utilitarian would have to seriously consider whether it was worth offing the one patient to save the 5 others. But let's suppose they had thought about the rule. Well, if one patient walks in and they have the right immune type, I'm not going to kill them to, save the lives of my other patients. This would be a really bad practice. It would lead to nobody ever coming into the hospital again, and healthy people staying away, and it just wouldn't. It just wouldn't do, and that's without any regard for what it would do to your professional status. But we're trying to deal with generalizations and fundamentals here, and not necessarily structure within our society. Um, so the act utilitarian may have to consider the act and have to stand there and go, is this one person's life more valuable than five others? And have to go through perhaps a philippic calculus to try and sort that out, which is not what we want our surgeons to do. Okay, so that way the rule of I will not kill my patients solves the problem. So that's one way in which integrating rule utilitarianism may actually help. And again, it resolves the ability to be able to keep promises. Okay. So this idea, justice, okay, one of the fundamental flaws of utilitarianism is that it does not directly address justice. It addresses being happy, being useful, fairly distributing goods, which is kind of a justice thing, but in a way that makes the most people the most happy, and that's not really the way things work when we think about what is just and what is not just. So when we address justice, we think about what's fair. What do we deserve in the given case? Do you deserve punishment or reward, for instance? And it's got to be kind of comparable and related to whatever it is you have done or refrained from doing. And it has nothing to do, though, with would it make everybody happier if we did it this way as opposed to that way. Let's suppose that a person murdered a homeless person who had no family left, or really didn't have any friends. Pretty much were on their own. Maybe they'd been a hermit for like 20 years and nobody even knew they were there, out in the woods somewhere. And the local authorities find the body and recognize that a murder has been committed. The ancient Greeks, if you remember back to Euthyphro, who wanted to convict his father of murder, they thought that it was the relatives of the deceased, of the victim, that should try to bring the murderer to court, right, and make them serve justice. But if you don't have any family, then no justice for you. But even though this person has no family, has no social connections, I think we usually have the intuition, at least, the feeling that this person's life had value and it was wrong to have murdered them, given no other information. And what we ought to do is punish the murderer. That doesn't bring back the dead person. It doesn't make anybody happy. It makes the murderer feel worse. But it is, nevertheless, the right thing to do. So, justice is not really served by utilitarianism. John Stuart Mill tries to, answer this complaint by saying that a good justice system is essential, right, for Social Security, in the sense that we all feel secure together. And you can't really talk about happiness unless there's some sort of protection and justice that's been made available. So it's an essential part of having a healthy society where we can talk about happiness and so on. But even in that case, justice is useful in as much as it serves utility. Justice serves justice, and that is all. And again, the rule and act distinction could be used to help out with this idea. Okay, one more thing, and I think we'll call this the end of the lecture. To give you an idea, when I'm talking about there is no moral basement, there is, no place that is too far for the utilitarian to necessarily go. We just look back to the end of World War II in the Pacific Theater and the American decision to drop the nuclear bomb, drop atomic bombs on Japan. This is considered to be a utilitarianist kind of decision. Supposedly, and there's lots of things with regard to history that are worth considering when you address whether or not this is the case, that it was estimated that 1 million troops would die if we had to do a ground invasion of Japan to force them to surrender. So in order to save at least 1 million Allied lives, it was worth it to kill citizens in Japan, bomb civilian targets in order to obtain their surrender. We wanted to demoralize the people of Japan to the point that they would surrender, without having to be directly invaded. In this particular circumstance, we really were treating the citizens, the civilians in Japan as a means to an end, and not as an ends in and of themselves, which is something we'll get into with Kant. But their deaths were intended to bring about the end of World War II, which is pretty horrible. I'm not going to debate whether or not this was the best idea or the right idea, but that your moral theory allows you to talk coherently about whether or not it's a good idea to kill massive swaths of people, there's probably a problem with your ethical system. So this is one of the criticisms of utilitarianism. Okay, I think this is good enough for this lecture, and we will continue with Immanuel Kant on another day. Oh, okay. This was a topic for discussion called Meat the Meat, and whether or not we could make eating meat more moral if we bred animals in such a way that they would desire to be eaten, and could communicate that fact to human beings. Would that make eating meat more moral? This is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or particularly, I think, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. All right. Yeah, and this is all from a later lecture for next year, and I thought I'd taken those out. Okay, thank you very much, and that's all, folks.